Es un honor presentar el premio Amelia Peláez 2022, otorgado por el Centro Cultural Cubano, a mi querido amigo y uno de mis artistas favoritos, el pintor cubano Luis Cruz Azaceta. Si me permiten, voy a compartir con ustedes una introducción sobre su vida y obra, la cual leeré en inglés. It is an honor to say a few words connected to the awarding of the Premio Amelia Peláez 2022 by the Cuban Cultural Center of New York to Luis Cruz Azaceta, one of my favorite artists of all time and also a dear friend. Luis Cruz Azaceta was 18 years old when he arrived in New York City on a direct flight from Havana. It was November 19th, 1960. He came by himself. His parents would join him in the winter of 1966. He went to live with his aunt and uncle and cousins in Hoboken, New Jersey, and he got a job at a trophy factory in Brooklyn. He belongs to the first generation of Cuban Americans, those who arrived in the United States with a formed notion of the land of their birth, yet young enough to be shaped by the new culture, and eventually to become a part of it. By 1966, he had figured out he wanted to be an artist and was attending the School of Visual Arts in New York City, graduating in 1969. After graduating from the school, Luis went to Europe for the first time. And in Madrid, his visits to the Prado Museum were seminal. He encountered the works of Bosch and Velázquez, and most importantly, of Francisco Goya. It was Goya's Black paintings that most affected him. He has stated, "When I saw what he was able to do with the elements of charcoal, paint, and canvas, well, it was extraordinary." And his content, you have to have content, a humanist content. The Spaniard's turbulent works made Cruz Azaceta question what he believed he wanted his paintings to be up to that point. He needed to find his own language, one grounded in who he was, a working class Cuban exile shaped by life in the urban Northeast. When he returned to New York, he was ready to change. As he has told me, I turned my back on being up to date. I decided to paint what I knew, what was around me. I worked and worked and worked and did not think of exhibiting. And work he did. He painted series of car accidents on the Vietnam War, on the New York City subways, etc. Many, many series reflecting life in the urban Northeast. And in the spring of 1975, he had his first exhibition at the Alan Frumkin Gallery in New York City. And as they say, the rest is history. Since then, Cruz Azaceta has exhibited in the United States, in Europe, in Latin America, all over the world. His work has entered important public and private collections worldwide, and he has received prestigious international fellowships, such as the Guggenheim, the Oscar Becintas, and the Joan Mitchell Foundation Award. The phases of his work have been defined by critics and scholars as apocalyptic pop, social expressionism, even geometric humanism, to mention only three terms. But I would add that beyond the limitations of any style, Cruz Azaceta transforms it all into a language where rage and compassion struggle and create a powerful imagery of the world. In an early work like The City Painter of Hearts from 1981, he depicts a metropolis in flames where skyscrapers contain body parts that evoke violence and sex. The sidewalk is littered with cigarette butts and human remains, while a large white rat devours a smaller one that is in turn devouring a mouse. In the lower right-hand corner is the artist, a nude self-portrait, painting a heart. Paradoxically, his vulnerability is his strength. He stands there, painting a symbol of love and sacrifice, while the world around him explodes in violence. In a work like The Dance of Latin America from 1983, he reflects the intense brutality the region was undergoing in the 1970s and 1980s. Military dictatorships and guerrilla movements with human rights violations on either side of the ideological divide. Cruz Azaceta has painted a macabre dance where a severed head, torso, and limbs move within a field of greens and grays, where barbed wire functions as a repetitive and restricting element. In this painting, he expresses empathy and solidarity, which are rooted in his experience as a Cuban exile. Within modern art, Cruz Azaceta belongs to the family of artists that includes Bosch and Bruegel and Goya, the Germans Max Beckmann and George Grosz, the Mexican Orozco, and his fellow Cuban Antoniadis. All are clear-eyed humanists who cannot stand oppression and hypocrisy, who must speak out through their brushes, who must bear witness to both the agony and resistance of the human condition. Cruz Azaceta has produced a vast and varied body of work in painting, drawing, printmaking, and installation, where topics have ranged from the AIDS epidemic, racism and homelessness, to terrorism, wars, and the devastation of Katrina, to name but a handful of series. In the late 1980s through the 90s, and right up to the present time, Exile and Cuba acquired a particular intensity in his paintings. We could say it is in part a reflection of post-Mariel repression, of the special period, and of course, the increase in balseros, rafters, fleeing the island in that brutal summer of 1994. Self-portraiture, which the artist has always transformed into a representation of every human being, of humanity, began to be charged with a darker emotional depth. And we see this in certain works, like The Journey of 1986, where in the dead of night, a balsero traverses the sea. Or of the following year, El Botecito, a small and filled ship of fools in a vast and labyrinth-like sea. Formally, these works are painted in layers that have been poured and scraped and repainted. The surfaces are rough and crater-like. The palette appears at first to be gray, black, brown, and white, with areas of orange or red. But through the layers, a wide variety of colors are discernible. As paintings, they all possess a painterly sobriety that recalls 17th century Spanish pictures, as well as, of course, Goya's Black paintings. Who are these ragged bodies? Will the rafter in The Journey reach shore, or will he be at sea for all eternity? Will the exile let go of the past and embrace the present, or continue to be torn and maladjusted? These works give witness and leave us with questions. History is the nightmare of ideology, and the figures in these paintings are trying to flee it, are stuck in it, or are crushed by it. In the 1990s, Cruz Azaceta's pictures acquired both flatness and the incorporation of discarded urban materials as collage elements. The rough painterliness of the late 1980s gave way to a thinner, minimal surface, while his subjects maintained the same tenor. A particularly moving work from this time, Man Carrying His Country, depicts a dark brown wall covered with numbers, which represent the endless days of exile. Where the wall is broken through, we see a harsh yellow and orange square. In it, a man carries his island. The heavy physical and emotional baggage. It is not an image of comfort, but of burden. Let me repeat. Cruz Azaceta perceives the breakdown of human values through a specific disaster, in this case, the betrayal of the Cuban Revolution, and the exile of its people. His art flows from here, from the particular to the universal. And it is here where his solidarious empathy is grounded. From terrorism, such as the work Oklahoma 3 and the Iraq War, as evident in Shifting States series, specifically the picture Baghdad, to the abandonment of New Orleans in an installation like Swept Away. By the way, New Orleans is the city that the artist calls home since 1992. And everything in between these subjects. Cruz Azaceta is a chronicler of the extremes of modern life, where the constants are catastrophe, suffering, and flight. His work of the most recent years has been recharged with a riotous sense of color, a very bold use of color. Loud reds and blues, intense yellows, greens and purples appear within massive abstract structures. He has stated, lately, I have been working in abstract modes, but not really. He parodies and subverts the vocabulary of abstraction, filling these forms with humans that are fleeing, surviving, or arriving as displaced foreigners. Forms which existed for their own sake when he was a student at the School of Visual Art are transformed into aggressive machines with endless hallways and dead ends. They stand for the world, for society, as a place of constant struggle. All throughout Cruz Azaceta's works, chaos and brutality have been paired with a dark and absurdist sense of humor, an irreverent and savage humor that laughs when faced with the terrible, a humor that may remind us of his fellow Cubans, the writers Virgilio Piñera and Guillermo Cabrera Infante. Cruz Azaceta's art possesses a paradoxical, resistant quality. In the 1980s, it garnered national and international attention with the rise of neo-expressionism. Yet his art takes apart the cliches of the neo-expressionist trend. He resists the latest fashion and continues devoted to painting, while transforming the medium with impure materials. He is a self-portraitist who avoids narcissism by converting his body into everyone's body, which bears the wounds of modern experience. He's a social artist who does not provide a utopic exit, but rather a sober reckoning with devastation. Only after it is long-term struggle possible. Only after this sober reckoning can we hope and continue. His art itself is the social agency. It questions the propaganda of the world and its successes. I conclude where I began. The loss of Cuba and the tragic vocation of exile as catalysts are the formation of a powerful artistic vision that unapologetically tells us that our human condition is that of aggressor and victim. A balsero, a rafter, fleeing in the night, a perpetual exile. The social expressionism of Luis Cruz Azaceta critiques a world of oppression and manifests solidarity with its victims. They are ultimately all emblems of resistance. His paintings, his drawings, his prints, his installations. Luis Cruz Azaceta is a Cuban painter. He is an American artist. And as someone once wrote of our best creators, se nos sale de Cuba y pertenece al mundo. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Iraidi Turralde, who will proceed to give the Amelia Peláez Award to Luis Cruz Azaceta. Thank you.
And now, on behalf of the Cuban Cultural Center of New York, it is indeed an honor to grant the 2022 Amelia Peláez Award to Luis Cruz Azaceta in recognition of his lifetime achievement in the arts. Luis Cruz Azaceta En nombre del Centro Cultural Cubano de Nueva York, me da muchísimo orgullo otorgarte el premio Amelia Peláez en honor a tu prodigioso talento, tu larga y admirable carrera y tu excepcional aporte a la cultura cubana. Para constancia de este reconocimiento, te entregamos también esta placa, acompañada de una escultura inscrita con el nombre de Amelia Peláez. Muchas felicidades.
Caramba, qué sorpresa tan bonita. Qué alegría saber que la directiva del Centro Cultural Cubano me otorga el premio Amelia Peláez en tributo a una de nuestras grandes artistas. Y yo, con mucho entusiasmo, humildad y gratitud, acepto este reconocimiento por mi contribución a las artes visuales en el exilio. Le agradezco inmensamente, como siempre, a mis queridos amigos Iraida Iturralde y Alejandro Enreus por su colaboración en la ceremonia de este prestigioso premio. Muchas gracias. Quedo muy agradecido. Muchas gracias.
To join the Q&A with Luis and Alejandro, please click on the link provided to the right of the screen. Looking forward to seeing you all.